Hi, Peter here. Thanks for dropping by my blog post. It's much appreciated. I'll just read this into the video for those people who like to watch video or download onto a device, just like I'm talking to you across from the desk. So here it goes. In my last blog post, which was a while ago now, I will admit, and for good reason, I said, quote, "Today with CTL and BI4, we say take everything into the staging area. Why? Because the cost of disk and CPU is negligible. And with CTL, the cost of ETL to get data into the development staging area is also negligible. Once all data that might be useful is in the staging area, it's much easier to decide what will go through. And today, typically, we send everything through as well, right? But of course, there's some time and effort to be applied to creating the ETL to send everything through. On projects in recent years, we have taken all the data that's not purely operational into the base layer of BI4. Now, in the next blog post, I will talk about how CTL and BI4 now support the process of supporting the path to the vision of it for outstanding success in a much better way than we were able to in the past, and usually in a much better way than anybody else does today. So that's what I said last time, and it's up to me to put up or shut up, right? But because, everybody in BI knows me, so everybody knows I can put up. So today we're going to talk about BI4 and CTL and why they are so effective for guaranteeing outstanding success in a business intelligence project. If you want to read details about these two products, please go visit our videos page or our downloads page, and there are links on the blog entry to those pages. There are hours of video and hundreds of pages of documentation on these two products, so obviously I'm not going to talk about the products in detail because there are detailed demonstrations available to and detailed documentation available to which you can go and read. I wrote the products, so I think they're fantastic, right? Let's be honest about it, right? So firstly, one of the most important things to do to guarantee that a data warehousing project is successful is to move all the data that might be useful into the staging area. Not that data that is known to be useful, all the data that might be useful. When in doubt, take the data and put it in the staging area. Now, people may challenge that, so it's up to me to say, why would I say this? So, true story. In April 1991, which is well before I got grey in my beard, in April 1991, I was in a meeting with the Director of Marketing of the Mutual Life Company, commonly called MLC in Australia. I had been assigned to the account just a few weeks earlier, and as it happened, I knew the woman who was about to present. Her name was Ingrid Brady, and my wife actually worked in her team at IBM. Ingrid had been asked to present a new product called IBM's Data Interpretation System, one that IBM bought, to the Director of Marketing, who was one Chris Pender. This was the IBM version of the famous Metaphor product from the company Metaphor. And Metaphor was a company that Ralph Kimball was a co-founder of. It's quite a heritage, that product. Now, via my wife, of course, who worked for Ingrid, Ingrid knew that I'd just been assigned to the MLC account. So she suggested I attend, and the account manager, Jim Groom, agreed. Now, in 1991, I was 27 and a fresh-faced new systems engineer just out of IBM marketing school. I was a bit of a kid. I was told to sit and listen and not say a word. You can't make a mistake if you don't speak, right? When asked what he really wanted to do, Chris had this to say, and near as damn it, it's a quote. It is 24 years ago, and you will forgive my memory over that length of time. But near as damn it, he said, we have 1 million customers and 1.1 million enforced policies, yet we sell over 500 products. Our cross-sell ratio is terrible. What I want you guys at IBM to do is to help us figure out how to improve our cross-sell ratios. And he went on to say, I want to be able to ask any question that can possibly be answered by all the data you guys have in your computers. He was seeing IBM, us, as you guys have got these computers, you guys have got all this data in it. I want to be able to answer any question I ask from all the data you guys have got in your computers. And he said, I don't know what questions I'm going to ask. I don't know when I will ask them, but I do know that I want the answer before I forgot why I asked the question in the first place. So in the discussion, when pressed about, well, how long does it take you to forget why you asked a question? What sort of response time do you have in mind? Right? It's an obvious question to ask as IBM. And Chris looked kind of thoughtful and said, pointed to another guy in the room, who I won't name because he's still around, he's my age, pointed to another guy in the room and said, if he, meaning his data analyst, can finish his cup of coffee before the computer answers the question, that's too long. So I guess we're talking about 5 minutes. And I guess I'm sitting there as someone who'd been in IT 9 years at the time, and I knew that the idea of being able to answer any question, and I mean any question that one might think of, from millions and millions and millions of rows of data in a DB2 database in 1991 was a pipe dream. That's not going to happen, right? But, of course, I was not about to say that in front of such an important customer. This was a major IBM account, after all. So what happened next changed my life. The account manager, Jim Groom, asked Chris if he was willing to pay IBM $30,000 to do this work over the next 3 months. And Chris agreed. Now Jim, I was sitting to Jim's left, so Jim happened to be sitting to my right-hand side next to me. And he turned and he slapped me on the back and said those fateful words that have rung in my ears a million times since. He said, and Peter Nolan is our expert in this area. He'll make sure you get what you want, Chris. It's like, what? What? Me, the expert? I'd never seen this software before. I just walked into this presentation because my wife's manager, a friend of mine, was giving the presentation. I'd never seen the software before. Great software, looked great, but I'd never seen it before. Jim suddenly slapping me on the back, telling the customer I'm the expert. I'm going to solve this for him. I'm going to get the results that I think are a pipe dream. Well, that'll teach me for going to a customer sales pitch, right? And the rest, as they say, is history. But in 1991, how do you meet a customer requirement of, I want to be able to ask any question that can possibly be answered by all the data you guys have in your computers. I don't know what questions I'm going to ask. I don't know when I'll ask them, but I do know that I want the answer before I forgot why I asked the question. How do you answer that? How do you build a computer system to do that? Remembering it's 1991, a disk is $20,000 per gigabyte at this stage. CPU is pretty expensive as well. I'm sure that most of you out there listening to this who do have data warehouses can't do this today, 24 years later. I mean, many of my customers can't do that. Many of my clients, before I get there, can't do that. How many of you can truly answer any question you can think up inside 5 minutes? Not many, I would wager. But that's what we did in 1991. Inside 6 months, after one false start for third normal form modeling, I had invented a new way to store data in DB2, such that pretty much every question the data analyst could dream up had a response time of less than 10 seconds. Indeed, about 90% of all queries happened in less than 3 seconds, and another 5% took about 10 seconds or less, and about 5% of the queries ran for anything up to 5 or 10 minutes, but almost nothing ran longer than 10 minutes. And this was compared to the failed third normal form effort, where every question took an hour to answer. And that's right, the first one, being an IT specialist, I built a third normal form database, and every question they were asking took an hour to answer. Cost a lot of money too, and CPU charges. So that was unacceptable, and we had to try again. Now, one of the big mistakes we made, big mistakes on that project, 1991, was to be selective of the data we took in to what we would now call a staging area. Of course, with disk being $20,000 per gigabyte in those days, this staging area was on tapes, and the ETL tool was called COBOL. Once we realized this mistake, what we did was we took all the data we could lay our hands on and put it onto a set of tapes. Then we did salt merges of the tapes to create one massive long record. That is huge, massive long record for each policy the company had on tape. And from this one long record, we could load up any data that we wanted from the tapes. So we had this stack of tapes. I don't know how many tapes we had, but we had this stack of tapes. And this stack of tapes was basically our staging area. And then from the staging area, whenever we wanted something else, we could just write a program to read the tapes to pull off what we wanted and put it into DB2. So we had a staging area on tape, which was everything we could lay our hands on way back in by then it was 1992, right? That's what we built. Right then, we all agreed you have to take all the data you can lay your hands on and get it on tapes where you can read it out of the operational systems. Well, of course, 24 years later, disk is a lot cheaper than $20,000 per gigabyte. Disk is, for all intents and purposes, when measured against corporate incomes, free. I mean, disk is free now. And you should rest assured that the process of taking all the data has been absolutely critical to the outstanding success of my projects. Lots of times my clients have tried to tell me that I must be crazy and that all the data is not needed. Pretty much every one of them has commented later how changing requests from the business have made the decision of taking all the data one of the best decisions I forced them to make. Usually I argue that point pretty hard. You see, the thing is this, the marketing guys really do not know what questions they might need to ask. They really don't know in order to move the business forward. It's not a case of they should know or they could know. It's really they do not know. And it's right that they do not know. So in the face of that, the marketing people need to be given a database that can answer any question fast. Now, my findings were confirmed in 1995 when Bill Inman did his first seminar in Australia, which I was lucky enough to attend. He was explaining his proposed idea of archival data models. Now, I'd read about these in his books. I'd met Bill in 1993, but it hadn't really sunk in what he was talking about, and we were busy, so we didn't look at it too hard. What Bill was talking about, of course, was taking a snapshot of data every day so that not only could an analyst ask any question of any piece of data, he could ask any question of any piece of data that ever existed in the company for all the values that it had based on daily snapshots. What? I was sitting there going, what? This was a very radical idea in 1995, I can tell you. I mean, there was 100 and something people in this room, and we're like, every value of every piece of data every day? What? Of course, the disk volume we're talking about is unimaginable in large companies. I mean, this would include banks taking a copy of every bank account every day, restoring the values of every field in every account every day. I mean, when he was pitching this, it was unimaginable. You know, unimaginable that we could actually build something like this. But as Bill pointed out in his presentation, and as me working in life insurance understood, the versatility and value of such a data model, we were sitting there going, I don't think we can build it, but if we could, that would be exactly what we want. Answer any question we ever had the data for. That would really be something, right? The value was without question. And it was, of course, a much more robust and versatile model than dimensional models. And right at that time, 1995, I was working on my very first proper star schema data model. And this new idea from Bill was stunning, to say the least. Now, I had built a star schema in 1993, but I didn't do it properly because I didn't know what I was doing, and I didn't have the ability to find out what I was doing either. I had visited Metaphor in September 1993, and I'd specifically gone to see the head of consulting and asked him directly, would he give me the information to build these star schema databases? And he said no, he wouldn't, and because I wasn't a member of his team, and they considered this information competitive, confidential, and a competitive advantage. So he said if I wanted one built, I'd have to get his people to build it. And the Australian dollar was like 50 cents US at the time. There was just no way we could afford to get anybody to build this thing. I mean, they were building star schema data models for about $1 million a piece back then. So our customer just couldn't afford it, just wasn't going to do it, NLC. So, you know, in 1995, I got my first chance to build one properly. But Bill's idea of an archival data warehouse was stunning, to say the least. So, I mean, it's a nice story, and people love stories, right? But why talk about all that? Well, because CTL today makes it very easy, and I mean very easy, to take all the data and put it into the staging area. CTL can read all sorts of file formats because it was written in C++. I mean, this is what we use on our projects to get stuff into the staging area, and we see a bit of everything, right? If you have a file format that's not supported, no problems. We just break out the C++ compiler and we write what is needed. If the files coming to you do not have field headers, then you can load the files into tables based on column positions. Of course, if you have headers, then you can load the files based on column name, and the tables do not need to be replicas of the incoming data to load. CTL defaults the extra 4 fields on the back of each record, and CTL can do inserts and updates on the staging area. CTL can generate delta detection SQL, so that if you are not getting the deltas properly from your operational systems or other data sources, then you can do your own delta detection. This is especially important to make work for deletes, because many people forget all about deletes when they're talking about taking data into a data warehouse. Because the staging area can now be placed into a relational database, of course, you can query it. Sure, the performance might be poor because the staging area tables should be close in structure to the operational systems to make auditing easier, but at least you can get an answer out of the staging area, even if it takes a long time. The tools that are included in CTL to enable you to load up your data in the staging area very quickly means that you can use the features of the RDBMS to perform your data profiling and get to know and understand the data. It also means that you can see full copies of your data so that you can find out all the data anomalies during testing, right? Very important to have a full copy of your data in your staging area so you can find all the bad data before you write your ETL. Why? Well, look, I can recall one time I was working at a telephone company and we built unsampled data, and as we tried to load up the production data, we got errors. Sure enough, some of the fields that were telephone number fields had email addresses in them. Okay, email addresses and telephone numbers. These were very few and far between. There was only a few hundred out of 6 million, which is why they did not show up in our test data. And the fact that they were there surprised even the customer, who didn't know that they were there, so there was no way for the customer to tell us about this. Now, obviously, we had a real problem having email addresses in the telephone number fields, right? We had to go fix that. Now, as far as I'm aware, CTL is the only tool I know about, and if you've got one, tell me, that makes it so fast and so easy to get data from wherever it is, in whatever format it is in, and get it into an RDBMS to begin the process of analyzing and understanding the data. I don't know of anything else easier. And, you know, the reason I wrote it is because that is exactly a big part of learning about the data that we're going to deal with in a data warehouse project. Now, the speed of doing this is an order of magnitude faster than Informatica or Data Stage was back when I was using those tools on a regular basis, and I doubt that's changed because of the nature of those tools. So the number one feature of CTL that has made it such a valuable tool in enabling me to deliver outstanding success for data warehousing projects again and again is the ease and speed of getting data into the staging area to analyze. Data analysis and learning the data is one of the most difficult and important jobs of a data modeler. If you don't understand what the data means and how it is structured, you can't put it into the data warehouse, target data warehouse sensibly, right? If you don't understand what it means, you don't understand how it relates, you don't understand how everything's structured, you can't sensibly put it into your data warehouse data model. Now, you may put it there anyway, but it won't be very sensible, right? And I have seen personally lots of projects done exactly like that, right? This is all about, let's stop all the failed projects. Hey guys? Now, next step, BI for all. Why is BI for all so important? Well, back in 1995, I did a banking data warehouse for my old pals at IBM. This was for a banking system that was being developed by IBM called RB2020. 2020, we used to joke, is probably the date of the first release. It was going very slowly, that project. It was eventually cancelled. This was to be my second true star schema project. As we developed the data models, I noticed that the structure of the data models was exactly the same as the structure of the data models for the MLC company that I just completed. I could see that if I had some generic code that populated fact and dimension tables, I could cut the development time substantially. The MLC project had taken us 18 months to build what we would call today a very modest prototype star schema data warehouse. Now we were going to do a full data warehouse for a banking system. We needed all the help we could get. And 1997, and that was the birth of CTL, that project. By 1997, I was working for Hitachi Data Systems, and I was doing another large insurance company, Manulife in Hong Kong. Again, I was struck by the similarities in the data models, but this time we had the forerunner of CTL working, and we were able to generate the COBOL code needed to populate the tables at the push of a button. This is one of the reasons why I was so successful at Hitachi. Literally, we'd put the data model into a set of files, we'd hit the button, and the COBOL code necessary to load it would spit out. It's fantastic. At that time, we were being very successful. I approached my boss at Hitachi and asked if I could reinvest about $50,000 of our profits into developing an industry standard data model for insurance. I felt that now I had two large insurance companies under my belt, I could probably develop a template data model for insurance companies. Now, I didn't get the $50,000 approved, and it was not long before I moved on from Hitachi. In my next job at PricewaterhouseCoopers, we actually had a very reasonable template data model for telco known as Knowledge Core. My old mentor from Metaphor was at PwC. Indeed, he'd spent 3 years trying to get me to join them in Australia. The work he had done was first class, absolutely first class, and we had very reasonable standard models, just no ETL to load them. And PwC did not want to hear about the forerunner of CTL because PwC sold billable hours, and a tool that reduced billable hours, that was not a good idea around PwC, right? So talking about my software was forbidden at PwC. Then, of course, my next company was Ardent, who were the makers of DataStage, who were selling an ETL tool. So obviously, talking about my own ETL tool was also not going to fly at Ardent, right? I couldn't do that. Again, it was obvious to me that standard models were the way to go. If we just had a standard set of models, we would solve a lot of problems. That was my thinking in 96, 97, 98, 99. You know, standard models, that would solve a lot of problems. Little did I know that a man had built them at that time. But my time at PwC was quite short-lived, and so we never really did get to flesh out those models. Now, if you read the history of BI for All on this page, and there's a link there to go and read, you'll see how it came to be developed and the kind of transitions that happened. So what BI for All does for our project is to tell us about 90 to 95% of what should be in the target data model and how it should be put in there. It also tells us all the design techniques that are necessary to implement the data warehouse using this style of model. Now, in my 14 years, and I've been doing this for 14 years, right? In my 14 years of putting BI for All style models into production, I've only managed to come up with one innovation in design techniques. Count them. One innovation I've come up with in 14 years. That tells you how good these models are, right? They went into over 100 companies, and I could only think of one thing to improve. Now, the prior version of the models were put into more than 100 companies. So we know in BI for All that if we find a problem in a client that we have not seen before, then there is already a technique to handle that in the data model. The likelihood that we will find a problem that we do not know and that we do not have a design technique for is very, very unlikely. Though we do look out for them, because if we found one, that would be kind of cool, right? The one innovation I came up with was also back in 2002 when I was my first year of working with these models. So it's now been 13 years that I've been installing these models and not had a second innovation in implementation techniques. Now, that's pretty amazing when you think about that. 13 years of working with a set of data models, and I can't come up with one innovation for a technique in using these things. 13 years? That's amazing. So with BI for All as your toolkit, you know that you have every technique you could ever need to implement this style of warehouse. You know it's there. You know there's nothing missing, and it gives you a lot of confidence. Certainly, when I walk into any client with BI for All as my data modeling toolkit, I'm as confident as they come, right? Even arrogant. You know, I know I've got this client covered. I know that I can do this job. The next big feature of BI for All that supported the guarantee of outstanding success is the sheer coverage of the models now. I mean, sure, they don't cover everything, but they do cover everything important, okay, especially in telcos. Now, I recently did a job for a major telco, household name, but who will remain nameless in this presentation for the obvious reason that they had just spent a year and $2 million on a failed data warehouse project. I mean, spare me, these big companies still failing? Give me a break. My job was to prepare the input for the tender document to be issued to 4 major players to do the job properly next time. As a part of this, I used the BI for Telco model as a tool to get from the business analysts what they felt they needed in their new data warehouse. The BI for All Telco models, out of the box, covered about 95% of the data they said they needed. The area that was not well covered was data from external parties that the telco wanted to include. So, you know, that's not much of a chance of BI for All covering unknown third-party suppliers of data to a telco in a standardized model. The data analysts at the telco could not believe that a model like BI for All even existed. I mean, they're like, what? Somebody has one of these things? Now, it was to be used by the telco to score each of the 4 vendors' proposed telco data models. The prior data warehousing consultants had tried to build the data model from scratch. Always a mistake now. If you're a senior manager listening to this in any sort of sizable company, and your IT people are telling you, we need to build the data warehouse data model from scratch, you want to find out why, right? Because in any sort of normal business, you must be running an extremely unusual business, but any sort of normal business, you do not want to be building a data model from scratch anymore. BI for All has excellent coverage and design techniques in campaign management, sales, marketing, customer profiling, customer segmentation. These are all the areas that are very high value areas and high profit contribution areas. So, as I said, way back in 1991, the problem statement was, we have 1 million customers and 1.1 million in-force policies, yet we sell over 500 products. Our cross-sell ratio is terrible. What I want you guys at IBM to do is to help us figure out how to improve our cross-sell ratios. And for much of the last 24 years, I have been figuring out how to sell more stuff. We even developed a 2-year roadmap for insurance companies. We used to walk into insurance companies with a 6-phase 2-year roadmap and say, this is what we think you should do for the next 2 years, and if you do, you will be millions of dollars better off. Nice big roadmap we had. And insurance companies would look at that and they would be very impressed. It was a very compelling presentation at the time, and we won a lot of insurance companies with it. And we did not even have a standard model. We would start from scratch each time for the data models. So today, to be able to walk into a retailer, a telco, a media company and be able to say, we have a data warehouse data model about 95% done. The other 5%, we can work it out. It's a very compelling pitch, right? Why? Because we all know 50% of data warehousing projects still fail. And one of the biggest points of failure is the data model. The data model gets designed by committee and comes out the other end of that process looking like a camel rather than a racehorse. It's often been said that a camel is a racehorse designed by committee, and that's what a lot of data models look like. Anyone who is building their data warehouse data model from scratch today is running a very large risk that is not necessary to run. Sadly, many of the companies that offer, we have a template data model, are offering complete garbage that doesn't work, right? Many of them are doing that. Now, just in case you are considering buying a data model, or even if you've bought one, if you do not want to buy ours, great, fine, fantastic, buy somebody else's. But we would be more than happy to review and critique any data model you are considering buying and letting you know our honest opinion on it, okay? And there is no, just so you know the value there is no one else in the world who is going to give you a better critique of a data model for a similar price than I will, right? And that would be money very well spent, given that you're going to have to live with that data model longer than most marriages last today. You get married today, average length of marriage in Australia today is 7 years. You will live with that data model much longer than 7 years, right? For whether it's good or bad or otherwise, you're going to live with that data model for longer than most people get married. Now, BI for All is critical for us to deliver on our guarantee of outstanding success because, one, it embeds all the data modeling techniques we need. Two, it covers about 90 to 95% of the data that our customers need to have in their data warehouses. And three, it forces us to capture all the data that is necessary to have in a very high value data warehouse that can be used by sales and marketing to drive cross-sells and upsells, thereby making lots more money for the company. Almost forces us to do that. This removes a lot of room for errors that might cause failure, errors that when removed almost guarantee success. Now, of course, by now, it's 32 minutes into this, I can see on the counter. Of course, you're thinking, Peter, look, okay, great, great sales pitch, great discussion, blah, blah, blah. That's all very good. But another big reason that data warehouse projects fail is that it's not possible to get the data into the data model and update it inside the batch window. So companies cut back on what they put into the data warehouse due to ETL processing problems. Now, it's well and good for you to say, take all the data, but if you can't get it into the data warehouse, what good is that, right? You could be thinking that right now, and if you were thinking that, that would be a good thing to think. Well, what would I say about that? What I would say about that is I am the absolute king. I am the king of make it go faster, right? My history of performance tuning large systems goes way, way back to the 80s. And there are a few people who know how to make it go faster than me, and most of them are retired, right? Most of them have put their feet up some time ago. Now, I can sound very confident. Great. CTL comes in two flavors, right? The C++ engine and the SQL generation version. The workbook entries for the two versions are identical, and so you can actually switch from one to the other. You can actually mix them if you want. Now, the C++ version was written as a migration of the COBOL version back in 2002. And in 2002, the databases did not have enough power to perform ETL in the timeframes that were necessary. Now, that all changed for us in 2009 when we met Netezza. The Netezza database was the first database that we found that had the processing power to perform all the ETL inside the database. Indeed, at one telco, we did 100%, that's right, 100% of the ETL processing inside Netezza in code generated by CTL. 100% of ETL in SQL on Netezza. Now, when our client announced that at the 2010 Netezza Users Conference in London to the 400-strong audience in a keynote address, you could have heard a pin drop. People were like, what? You didn't use it? You're a household name telephone company, right? You're a household name telephone company and you didn't use an ETL tool? You did everything in SQL? It was a stunning statement, really stunning statement. And I'm pretty sure we were the first people to ever do that. If we were not the first, then we couldn't have been far away from it, right? Now, sadly, because I took so much business off IBM in the late 90s, IBM likes to make sure they do everything they can to make my life difficult. And when IBM took over Netezza, we were sidelined after 4 years of building that relationship and 2 successful projects in household name telcos. Thank you, IBM. Much appreciated. Even though the CTL C++ version is a bit outdated now, it's still there and available to be used by customers who do not want to do their ETL inside SQL. When we were using CTL C++ in telcos like Saudi Arabia Telecom and Orange Telecom Romania, telcos, lots of data in telcos, the CTL ETL ran about 30% faster than we could get the same data stage jobs to run. That's right, out of the box, CTL was like 30% faster than data stage was. This is even with the incredible flexibility built into CTL file I/O that does cost a lot of cycles. I mean, the file I/O that we use in CTL is really CPU intensive. But CTL is prices per server. You can just buy more CPUs. It scales linearly, right? In CTL C++, this is just some of the performance features, so you know. In CTL C++, we were able to load dimension tables into memory and share those in-memory dimension tables, so we only had one copy in memory, with all the attribution processes that are running. The dimension tables are binary searched for keys to do the matching. We also have techniques to split up the input for the large fact tables to be processed, like call records in a telephone company, and process them in parallel. So for telcos, typically, we split each call record file coming to us into 100 subfiles, and then we schedule the processing of the 100 subfiles in parallel groups so that we can max out the CPUs in the machine during the attribution processing. And CTL C++ can flood CPUs with work in a well-controlled manner so that the machine does not thrash. And we've used, in one case, up to 16 CPUs in a system image in this fashion. And we've seen linear speed up for the processing of the largest batch processing needs, right? So 16 CPUs, 100 files, with the scheduler breaks them up and straight through. It's fantastic. It's amazing. So if you are today, 2015, if you are processing anything less than 500 million rows per night, you can absolutely bank on the fact that CTL C++ will get through that workload in under 8 hours. If you're processing over 500 million rows per night, I'd wonder what you're doing, right? There's very few companies who legitimately have a need to process more than 500 million rows of transaction-based data per night. Very few. Now, of course, CTL C++ must take the data out of the staging area, put it into files, process the files, and then put it back into the database, right? Because in those days, this was necessary because the databases did not have the power to perform the processing. And even if they did, the extra CPU licenses that would be necessary to run the ETL made it cost prohibitive. I mean, in those days, CTL C++ was selling for $20,000 US per site, which is less than the cost of 1/2 of one CPU of an Oracle database, right? And about 10% the cost of data stage or Informatica. So my customers, faced with processing this data, could pay for data stage or Informatica, or could pay for the database engine, but they were going to pay at least 10 times the $20,000 I was asking for, right? And so to get a full-blown ETL tool that will do everything that you need for $20,000 for your whole company, that's more than a bargain, right? So if you're using a database that has got enough power to perform the ETL inside the database for your volumes, then now that's a very good way to go. So CTL generates the SQL from the workbook, places it into the database itself, and it treats the SQL as another piece of data. It audits that SQL and always inserts a new version into the database, never deleting the old version, just marks the old version delete. So you have a full record of all the versions of all the pieces of SQL that have ever been used in your data warehouse. And I can tell you that's an auditor's dream. Why do I know? Because I was an auditor once, an IT auditor, so I should know, right? Having a version of every piece of code you ever ran in there and in the log telling you which version ran, that's an auditor's dream. So with CTL, because you get the choice of C++ or SQL engines, you can be absolutely assured that you have the tool to get all the data from your staging area into the data warehouse inside your batch window. Now, we've never failed in that area, and we don't intend to start now. I mean, 2015, machines and databases are so fast now, we don't ever intend to fail in the batch window area. Early 90s, that was a problem, right? Now next, if we stop and think about it, of course, there's the actual writing of the ETL to get the data from the staging area into our IBI009 models. Now we all know that the biggest portion of the development costs of data warehouse is writing the ETL. We all know that. We all know that the writing of the ETL has been on the critical path. We've not been able to really develop the applications and reports until a good portion of the ETL was written, right? Well, that's totally transformed with CTL, and there's a couple of diagrams on the blog that you should have a look at. The big breakthrough for CTL came in 2004 as a result of what was a quite heated argument. Our trainee had been sold off on another project, and the tedious work of cutting and pasting from the spreadsheet, which was the documentation, to the text, which was code, to give to the database fell to the DBA, because the trainee had been sold off. That DBA, he was not a happy camper. He was not a happy camper. He flatly refused to do this very boring, very menial, time-consuming job. But not only did he flatly refuse, and it was a heated debate because I was the project manager, but like the great DBA he was, and he was a good DBA at the time, despite his being young, he was a good DBA, he came up with an idea. And that idea was to save the Excel workbook as XML and read it with Visual Basic and generate the code needed. Now me, I didn't even know that Excel could save a spreadsheet as XML. That had come out with the XP version of Excel. I didn't know about that because I wasn't an Excel user very much. But he did, and he gave me the idea. I went, hey, that's a great idea. Let me go try that out. And that weekend, I built the first version of the VB netcode, and we've been adding to it ever since. That weekend, I wrote, if I stop and think, I think it was 5,000 lines of VB code. I got a couple of hours sleep for the weekend. So I wrote the first version, and by Monday morning, we actually had a working version. What was going to take him 2 weeks to do, we could do in about 10 minutes on the Monday morning. And I realized that, hey, we can use Excel as the data capture device for all the directives for a data warehouse. Now that 5,000 lines of code is now up to 80,000 lines of code. We just keep adding stuff to that workbook, and we now have over 80 workbooks defined, 80 workbook formats defined into our Excel workbooks, into CTL. So, with CTL, a lot of people say, oh, but it's a spreadsheet, you should have a GUI. No. With CTL, we got rid of the GUI interface for ETL development in favor of Excel. Why? Because the GUIs only slow good people down. When building ETL, what you want, believe me, what you want is speed of development for experienced professionals. You're writing ETL, you want speed of development for experienced professionals, not ease of development for novices. The GUIs in the tools give you ease of development for novices and slow down the experts. And I'll put this stake in the ground. I'll say, and I've been saying it for years, the idea of using novices to build ETL, it's always been insane, it will always be insane, and I will always say it is insane to use absolute novices to build your ETL system. And I've been saying that for more than 20 years now. Why? Because ETL is far too important to allow novices who have no idea what they're doing to develop it. I mean, for goodness sake, ETL is important. Please stop getting novices to build it. Get experienced people to build your ETL. I've been saying that for 20 years. And what do I see? I see I see ETL being built by people who've got 2 years experience outside of university with data stage and informatica, making all sorts of just very simple fundamental mistakes, don't even know how a computer works, most of them. When building ETL, when you are building an ETL subsystem, an important subsystem, you need full access to whatever programming tools you're using right there at your fingertips, not hidden behind some GUI or some other programming language that you've got to go through as an intermediate step, etc., which is the way of it with data stage and informatica. Most importantly, when building ETL, you want the documentation that the data modeler ETL designer writes to actually be the source code for the generation of the ETL subsystem. By doing this, you collapse the roles of data modeler and ETL developer into one person, and you get rid of the role of ETL programmer as the person who accepts the ETL specifications and programs it into the ETL tool. You minimize the paths of communication. By minimizing the paths of communication, you increase your likelihood of success. By collapsing these roles and discarding the ETL programmer, we got a 50% productivity improvement over the best we were able to do any other way, right? And since ETL development is always a big number in terms of cost, saving 50% of a big number is always a good idea. Now, just as a teaser, because we're mentioning this as we go along, we have found a way, right? We're 50% faster than anything we've ever done, significantly faster than everybody else. We found a way to go 10 times faster again, right? We found a way. We're still working on it. We haven't released it, but we were faced with a challenge. We were trying to do something. We were faced with a challenge. It's a challenge that we looked at it and went, given our standard metrics, this is going to take us 18 months to build this thing, and that's too long, right? So I spent sitting in my apartment here, pieces of paper, sitting around going, how do we do this faster? I need a 10, to make this viable to do, I need a 10 times improvement over the best I've ever done before, right? So when you sit down and say, I need a 10 times improvement over the best I've ever done before, that's a significant improvement. And I sat around in my apartment here, scribbling on bits of paper and kicking the couch and going, I don't find a way to do this, right? Until the idea came, right? Just kept at it until the idea came. So we have an idea now where we think we can go 10 times faster than the best we've ever done. And it's very promising, very promising. So if you're on my email list, stick at it, because they're the people who are going to know first. And if you're not on my email list, get on it, okay? So that you find out about this news first. Now, all that aside, CTL is critically important to us to live up to our guarantee of outstanding success on projects for these reasons, 7 of them. 1, it enables us to load the staging area much faster than any other tools available. 2, it provides data profiling tools to help us learn the data and understand the data much faster than anything else we know about. 3, it has a C++ and an SQL generation version, so we can pick and choose which version we will use on each project to make sure that we are making the ETL system run as fast as possible, and we can even mix those two versions if we wish to. 4, it has full auditing of the SQL generated and the SQL generation in the SQL generation version. 5, all the metadata in the workbooks is loaded into the metadata dictionary, which is of course then visible to any tools that read SQL, which is everything. 6, so you get a 6. Okay. Got to have an extra hand. The workbooks are the source code for the generation of SQL, delivering a proven reduction of ETL development of 50% or more. Now, I say of more because we were able to do a direct comparison with Oracle Professional Services, which showed us to be 80% cheaper in euros, for US guys, dollars, than Oracle PS. 80% cheaper. Now, that's not bad, since they used Indian-based people to do the work, right, to build the ETL system, and we were billing more than 1,000 euros a day for me to do the mapping work by comparison. So even when they had developers in India versus our 1,000 euro a day plus senior consultant pricing difference, we came out 80% cheaper than Oracle PS, right? So this idea of, well, the guys in India are really cheap. No, the guys in India are not really cheap because they don't know what they're doing, right? In a lot of cases. So when we did the same system, same computer system, same billing system for telco, and we built a data warehouse and Oracle PS built a data warehouse, we were 80% cheaper than Oracle PS, right? That's not bad. And as I said, we are working on a new idea that's already proven, we can go up to 10 times faster in ETL development. Again, a very exciting prospect, if you ask me. I mean, I must be one of the few people who gets really excited about ETL, right? So between BI for All and CTL and the way we approach projects, it is well nigh impossible to fail. Over the last 12 years since we had the CTL C++ engine, the only projects we have done that I could call a failure, and there were a couple, were projects where the clients refused to do what we advised them to do, just flatly refused. That happens. I mean, in one case, I submitted a written recommendation time after time after time. Write it down, here it is, look, this is what we say you should do. Only to have it overruled by client staff. Nothing I can do about that. The project was less than stellar. But when you write down what it is you feel your client should do and give it to them in writing so there can be no questions to your advice and they still choose to go their own way, hey, you can't be blamed for the results of a project where your formal written advice was not taken. That's not your fault, right? So yes, it is possible. It is possible to snatch failure from the jaws of outstanding success even if you have CTL and BI for All available to you. That's possible, right? You can refuse to use them as they were intended to be used, and you could refuse to take the advice that you're given. Then you might manage to snatch failure from the jaws of outstanding success. So look at that. I mean, that's 53 minutes, so that's a pretty long blog post. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope that I impressed on you in this blog post the critical roles that CTL and BI for All and the predecessors have played in guaranteeing outstanding success for our projects over a very long period now. And that period is 20 years this year. The very first version of what is now called CTL was written in 1995, right? So that's 20 years ago, and these tools have proven the test of time 20 plus years, time and time again. Of course, with massive upgrades and rewrites, 4 or 5 rewrites during that time. So with massive upgrades and rewrites and all the experience that we've gained, these tools have evolved and now have a 20-year track record of, if you use them as you're told, use them as you were advised, you will have an outstanding successful data warehousing project, right? So if you would like to go the next 20 years of consistently having outstanding success on your data warehouse projects, I can say that adopting the tools that I've crafted. Remember, these are my tools that I crafted and I developed from all the input from all the projects and all the smart people that I've met over the last 20 years. All that smarts, all that experience is now brought together in this suite of tools that says, you use this suite of tools, you're leveraging the experience of the greatest minds in data warehousing for the last 25 years. That's what you get out of these tools, right? So I can say that adopting the tools that I've crafted over this 20-year period would give you a very good place to start. Okay? Obviously, I'm going to say that. Now, look, if you got this far, thank you for reading. Thank you for listening. I hope this was useful to you. Thanks very much. Until next time.